We'll be all right. But hey, gang, what's going on? Coach Joe, Doc Danny. Other guy in the Skype chat is CJ Martin, CrossFit Invictus. CJ, happy to have you. How's things going?
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, CJ's a guy we've been kind of talking a lot about on the podcast. He comes up every now and then when I'll talk about my CrossFit experience with 808, or we've talked to a lot of folks who have come out of this OPEX model and just kind of guys training at Smart. And pre-show, guys, I found out that CJ Martin has been drunk 12 times in his life, but he lives in a state. We're in an interesting political time, and I guess where a lot of people are ramped up or worked up that our president might be or is Donald Trump. In California, they legalized the marijuana. They legalized the pot smoking, the edibles, all that good stuff. I don't know how far it went, but I thought it would be we kind of talked about that pre-show. We could get into this. CJ, you have some initial thoughts. We'll introduce you later, but some initial thoughts. So you were talking about writing that and kind of stacking it with some interesting things. So what are your general thoughts on this this new legislation passed in California?
Yeah, so yes, I guess to clarify, we were talking about whether things were off topics. I said, yeah. You can ask me anything. You can even ask me about pot. So let's do it.
Let's do it. That's right.
Yeah, let's go.
But I do think it's and let me say, I do not have an extensive background in either using myself or really understanding the effects very deeply, but I think it's worth looking at, certainly as we deal with a lot of athletes and we deal with a lot of professionals who we've seen over the years. I mean, we live in a high-intensity culture, and our high-intensity culture, as I'm sure you guys have seen in your communities, is not just the fitness and the athletes. It's also the type of personality that's drawn to what we do. And what we get is we get a lot of type A personalities, highly driven business executives that come into the gym and they want to get a great workout and they want to go to their job. And these are not 70% effort people. These are 100% effort people. And what I think is interesting as we see this legalization, I think it takes effect in January, is that now we may have an option to start talking to people about, hey, what if we do need to downregulate you a little bit? What if we need to give your adrenals a break? What if we need to start doing some stuff to promote sleep? Is this something that as a fitness and health professional that I need to get smart about, right? Because it's always, to me, just been like, oh yeah, that's a recreational drug. It's not something that's been a part of my life. And now I look at it and say, hey, maybe this is something that we have to start talking about as a way to, help improve people's lives and keep them fit and help them recover and help them relax and allow them to live a more full life when they wake up the next day. So I'm not sure that I've studied enough to have a deep opinion on it, but I think it's worth starting a conversation about.
Well, I think it's not as bad as people think. Like the stigma, right, is you're just gonna you're going to watch Half Baked and eat a bunch of Cheetos and whatever, it's the stigma of marijuana is completely wrong for the medicinal effects that you get, the actual medical effects. And you could make a strong case that certain things like Ambien, which you can get prescribed to you, are incredibly bad for you. And yet maybe have a similar effect in terms of sleep as certain, things you could pull from marijuana. So, for your athletes, where do you think that could fit in terms of that's something they would use in the evening to try to help them calm down and go to bed, or something like midday to kind of help try to relax them during the day? Like where do you see that maybe fitting?
Yeah, well, two things. That one, I think, you get into this stigma of like, oh, this is going to make people lazy. Like, the people that we deal with, the people that I deal with aren't lazy by nature. And even I think back to, I went to college in Oregon. And, there were some dudes that sat around and smoked and, played video games, right? But there were also, one of my best friends in college, right? He woke up, rolled over in bed, took a bong hit, went to class. That guy, was a great student. He owns his own very successful large marketing agency that is bi-coastal, right? It's a personality type. And if you want to be lazy, you may find recreational drug use as a fun way to enjoy being lazy, but that's not the people we deal with. There's no way in hell that I'm going to get Lauren Fisher, Maddie Myers to be so lazy that they're going to sit around and do nothing, right? My job as a sport coach is normally pulling the reins and saying, guys, we don't need to do more and more and more, right? It's always getting these guys to relax. So that would be my first statement, is that, I think that it comes down to personality, and nobody that's that driven is going to fall into laziness. But I also think when we look at that athletic performance, the athletic side, and how people may utilize this, like I said, I have a lot of research to do, but I certainly at night, at the end of the day, as we need to get them, right, as we've seen, the volume has gone up exponentially since, I was at the first CrossFit Games. I had the, pleasure of being part of that super fun experience. But we look at from 2007 even to 2010, the volume of training in the sport to now, we're talking about multiples of what we're doing, right? And the funny thing is, I started doing online coaching around 2007, 2008. And, I think about the program I wrote, and I would write 4 to 5 workouts for the week, right? Now, we look at our online clientele, and I may be writing, 3 to 4 workouts in a day, right, for 6 days a week. Like, I mean, literally in one client, I've seen 4 to 5 times increase on the volume in what we're doing. So when we look at that and we say, okay, now the importance of recovery has become, so substantial that we know that we're spiking cortisol a lot throughout the day with training sessions. We also know that when you have, 1 million Instagram followers, some of these young athletes have a lot more pressure on them than they ever did before, right? And so we know that, cortisol issues, general stress is way more relevant to our athletes. And, maybe this is something that they do use at the end of the day to start to relax so that they can get good quality sleep, so that they can reduce some inflammation, so that they can come back and be more successful the next day.
No, I think you're right on. I think, kind of ahead of the curve guy. It's something that people need to start writing about and considering. I know as, three kids, stressed out, doing some things here, I would love to downregulate every night. I'd love to work that out. And sometimes, it's, when you look at something like alcohol or doing it with a bottle of wine or a glass of wine at the end of the night.
Whole bottle.
Whole bottle of wine. No, but, there's side effects to that where you don't get that kind of hormonal response at night, where it'd be cool to see someone really look at the blogging and doing some of the research and seeing how it affects the recovery process. I think it's a neat topic. It's something I'd be in favor of. I know this. I was a complete turd when I'd be hammered drunk, walking around campus, busting stuff up, acting like a jerk. But, when I've had the pleasure of indulging in more, getting into some marijuana usage, I'm generally a little better person high on the marijuana than I am drunk on the booze. So from that regard, personally, I'd be in favor of it. Don't know if we're moving to California. Don't know if Uncle Sam's going to allow that, but we'll see. It's on.
But what you will have is some awesome roads. Like, you're going to have so much tax dollar increase from this shit. Like, look what happened in Colorado. I mean, they're repaving like all the highways in Colorado. There's a reason why people voted it in. I mean, it makes sense financially for you to do that from the tax purposes, and people are going to do it anyway. You might as well make money off it.
Right. I mean, I think that it was a no-brainer for most Californians.
I'm sure.
It passed overwhelmingly, but yeah, absolutely. What it's done for economies in the states that have legalized has been fantastic. And we also have we've had great friends at CrossFit Marysville. We've been, lucky to be involved with their training. And, one of their young guys, kid Kyle Flanders, right? This was a kid that was, I think, working at Boeing. Nice kid, hard worker, good athlete that I got to know. And, Washington legalized, and dude, that kid and his family, like, they were their distributor, and it's awesome, man. And it's awesome to see the industry that's been built up in some of these states and smart people that have taken advantage of it.
There's have you seen the documentary on Netflix? I think it's called High Profits, I believe. And it's about it's about that first year in Colorado, that's in Breckenridge, that shop got turned from medical to recreational. And what was fascinating was that the state law changed, but the federal law didn't. So they couldn't take their money and put it into a bank because it wasn't federal law to be able to sell that. So they had all this cash on hand, like millions of dollars in just straight. They could only take cash, and there wasn't a bank that would take it. So I'm not sure what the federal regulation is on that now, if they can do it or not. But they were here are these skinny hippies with all this cash, and they didn't hire security. And so I don't know. It's unique. It's a unique time to see change of this stuff.
It's crazy. Yeah, no, I hadn't seen it, but that sounds awesome.
Well, you bloggers out there, get on the right and before CJ and his crew at Invictus do. So real cool. So CJ, we'll kind of segue that into your website, and you brought up kind of online coaching and what you're doing. We know you're a guy who wears many hats, and you're into some great stuff. And also pre-show, we kind of talked about a story you were telling us about Lauren Fisher, and where you kind of saw that this girl had something that you liked. Could you kind of elaborate, maybe kind of go back to that story, and then talk about maybe some things that you'll look for when you pick up a new athlete or new client, or what CrossFitters need to be doing now to maybe be competitive or get into that?
Yeah, sure. So Danny and I were talking about, we actually sat next to each other at that 2012 regionals when Lauren was a high school senior. And so I had been introduced to her, and Gabe Subri, who was a competitor and helped coach Lauren at CrossFit 209. He had said, "Hey, there's this great girl. She's thinking about moving down to San Diego to go to school. Like, I'd like for her to meet you. I think she'd do really well at Invictus." And so, of course, when you're talking about 17-year-old females, I say, "Are her parents here?" I said, "I would like to meet her parents first." And so I actually did that. I went over and introduced myself to her parents, and then actually she came up while I was talking to her parents. And so met Lauren. Didn't know anything about her. Like, okay, this kids, she made it to regionals as a high school senior. That's great. But as we were sitting there, and as I watched, what impressed me was the row pistol hang clean event, in which, at the time, I think it was 135 pound. For people not familiar with the workout, it was row 2000. I think it was 50 pistols and then 30 hang cleans with, I think for women, it was 135 and 225 for males. And so Lauren's doing the hang cleans. It's heavy for her at the time. Just kind of destroying her. I think she was like 3 reps away, if I remember correctly. And I see she had just done like one hang clean, dropped the barbell. And I see her judge come over to her and tell her, like, "You've got 10 seconds left." And despite the fact that she had just dropped the barbell and walked away from it, she immediately jumps back over to the barbell, grabs it, does 3, and crosses the finish line, I think 1 second ahead of the clock. And it was that moment, it wasn't, she did well in some workouts and stuff, but it was that moment that I got super excited. I'm like, I would love for this girl to come to San Diego and come to Invictus. And because what she showed was a mindset and, a determination that showed me that she could be a really high level athlete, right? Because she wasn't going to let the workout beat her. And it wasn't about beating other people. It was, she realized that she was going to be against the clock, and she wasn't just going to let that clock tick out. And so somehow she found an extra gear when it appeared that she was, struggling in that workout. So she found that, and that's exciting to see somebody that is that competitive, that wants to be that good, that wants to be at their best. And also to know that clearly if she had that at the end, she has more in there. She has more potential. And it's just as a coach trying to figure out, how do you draw that out? How do you create that opportunity for an athlete to be the best version of themselves? That was was a long time ago, and it's so cool to see how she's grown, not just as an athlete, but as a human being. But she has worked so hard to realize that potential in herself.
Well, and you guys have some really cool stuff on your website as well. With the programming that you do have up, and there's 3 levels that you guys have that people can follow. And I've actually followed Invictus in the past when I was in Hawaii, and we actually had a listener on our podcast ask that I want to ask a question that's following the competitors program right now, and I have to read who put this down, by the way, because it's a funny name. So it's from D. Castro Wears Dresses, and the question is, for the competitor programming, what pieces of the day's programming should you prioritize if you have time constraints? And they say, please don't answer, well, whatever you think you need to work on. So I think what they're trying to say is, if all things are equal, their conditioning and their strength / Oli lifts aren't necessarily neither one is one better than the other, and they're limited on time. What of those kind of 2 areas do you think that the average person should focus on that wants to get better at competition CrossFit?
I love limiters on questions. I always
it's a long question.
I always warn at our athlete camps. I say, like, hey, we're going to answer every single question you have, and I'm probably going to give you the least satisfying answer you'll ever get. Because 99% of the time, the answer is it depends, right? Yeah. So nobody is equal at all things, right? Athletes have different, elements of strengths and weaknesses. And so what we talk about as being extremely important is, one, you have to understand, everybody's initial assessment has to start with, where am I? Where am I right now? And what do I think are strengths and weaknesses? But then ultimately, and frankly, where I think my team and I add value as coaches is, you have to understand the competitive landscape, right? And so most athletes, if I'm being honest, do not understand the competitive landscape. Even high-level athletes, the higher-level athletes will overestimate the strengths of their competition, right? The lower level athletes will underestimate the strengths of the competition. And so what we see, just to give an example of that, is we'll have consultations of people that will come in and that are interested in doing individualized program design. And they'll say, I'm really strong, but my conditioning isn't where it needs to be. And then we'll start getting into stuff, and we'll say, like, oh, that's great. What do you snatch? And they're like, I snatch 225. And I'm like, you're not really strong. I'm sorry. But like, if you're a male and you want to compete at the regionals and you aren't snatching 265 or maybe 275, you can't tell me that you're strong, right? And so part of what we do is try to help people understand what their priorities are as an athlete, right? And to give them a view of the competitive landscape. So yes, it's a loaded question to say, everything's the same. Like, it probably isn't, but let's pretend it is. Okay. So if we're going to pretend it is, and I'm sure I'll get hammered on this because I know there are people in other camps, but I still believe that strength is the price of admission. If you are not strong enough, right, to lift weight. And let me tell you quickly how I learned this and why I came to this. I had the pleasure, by sheer opportunity of when I started CrossFit, to compete in the first 2 CrossFit games. And I came from a martial arts and boxing background. And then I got into, after I was done with that, was running marathons and stuff like that. I had decent conditioning, right? But then, the CrossFit Games come around, and the 2007 wasn't that bad. It was the CrossFit total, and so whatever, you get your score and you realize, I'm not nearly as strong as the rest of the guys. But 2008 was the real eye opener, where they had, at the time it was deadlifts and burpees, right? And on a burning hot wrestling mat that everybody was burning themselves on. But the male weight for deadlift was 275. Dude, that was like just off my 1 rep max, right? And so like you see all these guys struggling, and so I learned it personally because I was like, that workout is miserable, right? But then I had met Chris Spieler the year before at the inaugural games, and I thought like, oh dude, this guy is the best. He's gonna destroy it. It's gonna be so cool to watch. And if you haven't seen the 2008 CrossFit Games, the thing that was really cool about it is they ranked the events, and so you started the final event with the head start that you had accumulated, right? So Chris started the event with like 1 minute and 40 seconds before the next competitor, and the event was 30 squat clean to overhead at 155 pounds, which at the time was heavy, and now I think people don't remember that was heavy if you just started CrossFit. But and so I was like, oh, I was sitting, filming this final event, camera on Chris, like, dude, this is going to be so awesome. He's going to crush it. And Jason Kalipa was in like 12th, right? And so the way they did it, it was like first place started here and then it wrapped around, right? And so Jason Kalipa was like right below me as I'm filming, but nobody's even looking over in this section, right? Everybody's looking at the top 4 guys because they got this massive head start. And somehow I start hearing like 26, 27, and I'm like, what? Like nobody's at 27 reps, right? And I like quickly look down, and Jason Kalipa is doing a thruster with the weight. And all these guys are like cleaning it, standing up, resetting, jerking, right? And he's thrusting the weight. And I'm just like looking, I'm like, holy crap. Like game has totally changed, right? Because nobody could doubt, like Chris Spieler was so superior in terms of his conditioning at the time. But it didn't matter how well conditioned if he couldn't move the weight quickly, right? When I was trying to do the deadlift burpees, it didn't matter how fast I went on the burpees. I still had to stand there and stare at the barbell before I got a chance to look at it. And so when I back that out and I think about how we coach people and what we coach on mindset, if you're strong, then you can have the willpower, the desire, the willingness to hurt to get through the conditioning, right? But the opposite is not true, right? I could have wanted to lift that deadlift and wanted to express my mental fortitude all I wanted, and that bar wasn't freaking moving, right? And so I always say, like, strength is your price of admission. Like, if you're missing that, we're gonna have to work so hard, right? And you're gonna work so hard, and even as the sport grew and developed, you saw guys like Chris who still, I forget the last year, 2014 or 15, whatever year, 14, I think, with all the dumbbell snatches and stuff. Like, that guy is still, probably to this day, after kind of retiring and spending time with his family and his business and everything, he's probably still better conditioned than 90% of the CrossFit Games athletes. But man, if you don't have that raw power and strength, it's really tough to compete in a power sport.
Well, I would agree with you there. I think you're not going to get strong all of a sudden, right? But you can kind of dig deep and go. I 100% agree with you. And in that story, you bring up a really cool development in CrossFit. You talk about you need a 265 snatch to a certain degree, and I can even remember you telling a story about one of those initial games where it was the first time you actually had to clean and jerk 135 pounds. And like, I remember you telling me this story was so funny because you're like, oh my gosh, they want us to jerk it too? Usually we just clean that weight. And I thought that was funny. So, we know that the numbers have grown in terms of the strength needs, but what other changes have you noticed in CrossFit in terms of the training of it that's different now from 2008, 2007 to now, where we approach which should be a pretty cool, exciting 2017 open season?
Yeah, I think I just think it is so much more sophisticated now than it was, and in a really cool way. I think. Yeah, and as I've gotten more involved in weightlifting as well, I look and I think when you start to break down the strength and conditioning aspects that are required and the science that is required in a sport like CrossFit, in putting all these different elements together, it's tough. I mean, I'm not sure that there's another sport where you have to manage as many energy systems, skills, and strength qualities as you do CrossFit, right? And so over the years, CrossFit has gone from, primarily an exercise with some recreational competition to, for some of these guys, it is a sport. It is their primary sport. They are making money doing this sport, right? And so the training has to change entirely around that. The timing and the periodization, which in the early days, we were all just doing CrossFit for GPP. And when the CrossFit Games popped up, it was like, oh, cool, we'll just go test some stuff and see where we're at.
Yeah.
Well, now we've got annual calendars that are all based around, okay, you're going to compete at, in the Granite Games in September. You're going to have to be prepared for, the Open at the end of February, right? We've got our regionals, and then we build the calendar and we start, and say, okay, that means that as soon as the games are over, we go into our regeneration recovery phases. We start building out, programs to make sure that they don't have asymmetries so that we can build a foundation to train on. And now all of a sudden, everything becomes planned, right? And I know that there are guys, right? It's very popular to have these theories of like, oh man, we just get together and we throw down, and that's fun. And I don't ever want CrossFit to lose that, right? But the fact is, as the sport develops, it's going to get much harder to just throw down some workouts with buddies and still be at the highest, end of the spectrum. That they are going to have to be very dedicated to what they're doing for their recovery, what they're doing in their workouts, planning volume, making sure there's structural balance in their programs. All of the things that we've seen in, longer, more established, developed sports like track and field, which people don't just go out to the track and say like, hey,
let's
you
race.
run it. Let's do it. It's people aren't going to the Olympics running the hundreds, just showing up and asking their buddies what they're doing that day. So, I've always, I think it's tough because we're at a point where, like I said, I don't want people to lose that. I don't think you should ever lose that sense of community and the camaraderie that comes with just showing up and training together. But at some level, there has to be an overarching plan. That's how we train here, is that there's an overarching plan and there's some room for individualizations, but we all train together, right? So, Lauren shows up and Maddie shows up and, Garrett Fisher moved out here in May and Garrett shows up and Rasmus is here. And yeah, they are throwing down together, but there's at least structure and there's some small individualization. Holden is one of our phenomenal athletes who was on our team, right? Incredible front squat, core posterior chain. He's going to do something a little different on the wall ball thruster days because it's not a priority for him, but we're going to change the movements and we're going to keep him in an environment where he can continue to push and thrive. So we try to walk the line on providing structure, allowing that to happen, and then individualizing as much as necessary to make sure that person gets what they need.
What sounds like a very time-consuming process to program, in particular for CrossFit, but with all the variables that you just mentioned. For yourself or a coach that you have that does online programming, what's the max number of athletes that you guys like to work with? Like how many is too many? Because it seems like you would dilute your ability to give them one-on-one attention if you get too much.
Yeah. So for me, I take a lot fewer than my coach. Yeah, because I've got other responsibilities. But 30 is our cap. So. And honestly, only Tino Marini, who is, he's worked for me since 2012, and really is my right hand guy. He's our head of athlete development, and has done an awesome job and has become a phenomenal coach on his own right. But he's the only person we've ever even taken to 30 because he was capable of it, but that's all he does. That's all he did was on coaching. And, he couldn't get into the United States for about 18 months after he married his wife and they were going through the visa process. And so he was stuck overseas. And so he got up to 30 because he was like, dude, give me something to do. I'm sitting in the UK and missing my wife and missing the gym and doing all this. And so, he took up to that. Our other coaches, as they're developing, they may start with 5 clients and not do more than 5 clients until they've shown that they can handle that their clients are kicking ass, that their clients are getting the attention, and then we slowly add like 1, 2 at a time. We do not have a large mill of online athletes. We are not trying to churn out online athletes. We've been very slow and, probably from a business side, much too slow for me to let go of the reins and now for Tino to let go of the reins. But that's something that I think we've done a great job with the athletes we have. And I've been very nervous to just open that up and for volume if it sacrifices the integrity of what we do.
Well, that's interesting that you say that because you've been obviously doing it for a while. I mean, you were working with us from Hawaii, and it was an interesting concept to do that. And I know Elise had reached out to you, but it's cool that you've kind of slow grown it, and the priority is quality coaching, not just the volume and saying this many Invictus athletes doing that. Talk to us a little bit about your development of your coaches and how you go about doing that. We've kind of brought this up briefly when we talked to Ben Benson, and you're not the only one working with some Invictus athletes. You just talked about Tino doing some things, and how do you bring along a coach? Is it the same way? Do you have the same way you kind of noticed Lauren with 10 seconds left going back to the barbell? Are there some things that you notice about someone, hey, they're going to be a great coach for the group setting, they're going to be a great coach online, they're going to be the coach that I want to represent Invictus? How do you go about developing and seeing that talent?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me preface this by saying, if I'm probably most critical of myself for not spending as much time as I should have earlier to develop coaches, right? That I still enjoy coaching.
Sure.
And people have asked me like, hey, why don't you do seminars or program design seminars or, it's always because I'm still in the gym. I'm still coaching these guys. And some of that's starting to change a little bit more. But what you kind of touched on, Tino has been the guy that really I decided, all right, I'm going to bring somebody on to really mentor and spend time with. And Tino was an athlete of mine. He's from Scotland, and he had come out to the United States. I had started coaching him online. Every interaction with him, he would go to a competition. He might get his ass kicked, and I'd say, how'd it go? And he'd say, you know what, it went really well. I didn't perform as well in these events as I would have liked because of this. I should have probably done these things different, but here are the things I learned. And every time we would communicate about training, about his competitions, he would have a very mature approach and a very kind of understanding of the emotion and mental aspect of what it takes to succeed. And I've always said that I love the sport, I love health and fitness, but I love it also because it teaches us lessons about ourselves in other aspects of our lives. And when I look at somebody that was smart enough and mature enough to make an analysis on that, because most of the time somebody comes back from a competition, they got their butt kicked and they're like, I sucked.
That's right.
That didn't go well, right? And instead, I got somebody coming back and said, I learned a lot. I didn't finish as high as I wanted to, but I learned a lot, and here are the things I know I could do differently or could have done differently, right? And I was like, this is the kind of person. Now, Tino did not have, I think he had started to do some coaching, but, his degree, he's a college graduate in, business finance, right? And so it had nothing to do with any experience. It had everything to do with his character. And I was like, hey, would you ever be interested in coaching? And he had been an online coach for a couple years. He understood the process. He understood what worked well for us, for me to communicate to him. And so I knew he would understand that role on the other side, right? Is what does somebody expect from an online coach, and what can I give them that's valuable and what isn't really valuable? And so that was how it started with Tino. We really, like I said, we haven't taken on a ton of coaches. Nicole DeHart does a lot of our, intake. She does some online coaching for us. She works with all of our masters athletes, and she's amazing. But, Nicole's been with us since 2008.
Yeah.
She's been a rock for me and for Invictus. And so then Brian Miller moved down. He was an athlete that was, followed the Invictus program and up in the Northwest, qualified for the games in 2013. He's a smart guy. So he came down and he started doing some coaching for us. And then Hunter Britt, who was on the CrossFit Conjugate team in 2014, that took second. We took first. I always like to remind him of that. But so he moved out. He's a great. He's a young kid, early 20s, and he's one that we've started with like 5 clients, and he's doing a great job. And so he's somebody that will continue to develop. But my development, where a guy that I look up to and is a good friend, James Fitzgerald, right? He's so focused on that education piece, and he'll educate people and he'll push them out and he'll let them run with clients. And because he spends so much time to get them spun up, I haven't dedicated that time yet. And so, our letting go of coaches and letting them take on a bunch of clients is a years long process at this point. And like I said, probably in the future, I'll devote more time, but right now, man, I love being with athletes. I love being in the gym, and there's just a lot of pulls on my time.
We talk about developing a lot, developing coaches or developing, a certain mindset. And, I think books are just a really cheap, phenomenal way to learn things. Are there any books in terms of like personal development or coaching development that come to mind that you could recommend somebody, take a look at?
Yeah. Where to start? One, I think that anything with John Wooden on leadership is like, yeah. I think the guy's phenomenal, and he was phenomenal in every aspect of his life, and that says more to me than there are a lot of successful coaches or a lot of successful athletes that have not been very successful in other aspects of their life. And that to me tells about talent. It tells about where they place priority. But when you look at somebody like John Wooden and you see, wow, this guy was a phenomenal husband, was a phenomenal father, was one of the best. Then you start to look back and you say that wasn't talent. That was an understanding of a certain principle, right? And that's what I hope. I mean. When I look at our young athletes, when I look at a Lauren Fisher or a Maddie Myers, I love those people as human beings, right? And right now I get to enjoy watching them thrive at this stage in their life. But what I hope that in the process of being an athlete and becoming the best athlete they can be, that in 30 years, they're also going to thrive in whatever it is they've decided to do as parents, as spouses, as professionals, right? And because hopefully they understand the carryover of setting goals, working toward goals, understanding that there will be obstacles, there will be setbacks, and how you get around those, right? And I think John Wooden, he's kind of led with that principle first. And that would be my goal too. So I would say Wooden on leadership for sure. Just scan bookshelf real quick, but more recently, a book that I've read in the last 6 months that I thought was really good and well written, both from a business perspective, really for a business perspective too, was Jocko's book Extreme Ownership. which I'm sure, that's been kind of a very popular, I normally don't want to just tell books that I know are so often recommended in the space, but it's really that good. Like I got it after hearing a million people talk about it, and I was like, wow, that actually was really helpful to me. So yeah, I think those.
Well, the Jocko book is great, and it would be cool. I'm waiting for him to come out with a version that's not a business one, but it's like the same stories paralleled with like being life, because, I'll recommend that book, and they're like, well, I don't want to run a business. Well, I'm like, well, then just read it to be a better person. Read it to take ownership of your life. Read it to just take control, because the takeaway from that book is, establish dominance and you take charge of it and you make it better. So, great recommendation. To kind of switch gears, you bring up some cool topics about your young athletes, what they're going to be like when they grow up, being parents, spouses, professionals, performing well, being good at everything. You're someone who's a decent example of that, right? I mean, you're growing Invictus into what now 3 gyms. You're taking care of your athletes. Your athletes are producing, and you got 2 kiddos now, right? And you're keeping them happy, I'm sure too. So. Danny talked about time management with you at the beginning of the show. How are we juggling all that? And talk to us a little bit about the quality of person that CJ Martin is away from the gym.
Yeah, well, I don't know. We're all always our own biggest critic. And so, it's tough, man. I always say about the business in particular, I feel like I'm failing every day, but we're just trying to do the best we can. And I will say that the one thing that I won't fail on is my kids, right? It's the one non-negotiable. And it does put a strain on me in the business, and it puts a strain on, me as a coach. But my son gets out of school, and that may be, that it may be the right thing for my family to pick him up. And so I pick him up at 12:30 at least a few times a week. And that may mean that I'm late for our, training session in the group, and, Tino gets him started. And, to be honest, that has some athletes have been like, well, you weren't there. And that's true. Like there have to be sacrifices, but the one thing that won't sacrifice is my kids. And so I am home for bedtime, and that's tough as a gym owner, because a lot of people are coming in the evenings, and I miss being around, and I miss shaking everybody's hand and seeing all of our members that come in at 6:30 at night. But my option is missing putting my kids down to bed and, having those moments with them. And so those are the things that I've said, like, non-negotiable. I'm not going to miss out on those moments. I'm not going to do that. Now, what that means, I've found, unfortunately, over the years, that the easiest thing for me to sacrifice is my time, health, and fitness, right? And so, I hate that I'm not in the best shape that I want to be, right? I hate that I'm not always well slept, but often my choice is, hey, if I've got 2 more hours of work to do, but I got to get home, see the kids, play with the kids for a little bit before they go to bed. And, as much as I tell people, hey guys, no computers, out, an hour before bed, right?
You're on it.
True. Yeah, like I put my kids to bed, I eat, spend some time with Courtney, and I'm back on my computer, and she may go to bed, and I'm banging out programs to make sure that people have what they need, and I'm making adjustments to programs, and I may be up till 11 at night, and I'm still waking up at 5, and I know it's not great, but when I look at my day, I've got to figure out what sacrifices, and like I said, I counsel people on this, and so I hate being a hypocrite, but, we counsel people and say, like, hey, you got to take care of yourself so you can be there for others. And, at the stage of life that I'm in right now, I haven't figured out exactly how to find the balance where I'm not sacrificing that stuff for myself. I know it can be done because I've helped other people do a great job of it. I'm just, I would say I'm failing on that a little bit.
Man, I feel I could not agree with you more. I feel like that's a very similar position that a lot of people find themselves in. And when I got out of the military and took a job working with Kelly, I remember he told me, he goes, be careful what you wish for, because what can happen is sometimes you get so you get popular to the point where people are constantly wanting your opinion on things, or it has to do with your business or some variation of programming. Or for me, it's our practice with actual patients. That balance can be really hard, and I think it is hypocritical. I do the same thing. I like when we were in Hawaii, best shape of my life. I had an hour and a half every morning to work out because I had to. I was in the Army, and it's part of my day. It's just built into it. And now you talk about businesses and kids, and I feel very similar to you. And I think it's admirable that you won't sacrifice your time with your kids, because a lot of people do. And I see it. I get to talk to people for an hour, and there's some unhappy people out there that are ultra successful, and they never see their kids, and before they know it, their family life sucks. So for me, I think you can burn your body down a little bit in respect to spending more time with your kids, but there's got to be a balance there, man. There's got to be a way to figure that out, And maybe Joe can help us with this, because you and I seem like we're struggling with the same problem. What do you think, Joe? What do you do to balance this out? Because time management is something I want to talk about, and I thought you had this all figured out, man. You're not helping me out at all, CJ. I gotta ask Joe. I talk to him all the time.
I cannot help you with this one. I'll tell you what you do. You quit. You don't work. You don't earn a paycheck. You have a wife who kind of supports you. What we've done with our family is we looked at it a lot. Yeah, that's what you have to do. Eliza loves what she does in physical therapy. Her boss in the Army wasn't as flexible as mine in education, and slowly as she kept wanting to do different schools and do different things, and we kept wanting to prioritize the kids, I just had to chunk away and stop doing work. So what I do is I work at home. I'm online. I do little videos in the garage. I kind of chat with you guys here. It's just the give for me where I find balance is not having a boss, right, and just finding a way there. So we're one of those families that do prioritize the kids, and I've had to kind of sacrifice professionally to do that. So, man, you just got to know what you're going to give away with. You know what I mean? So it's a really tough decision, but I'm in the same boat as CJ there, where I won't fail the kids. I won't sit here and say that my parents failed me, but it's an interesting story where I was raised by aunts and uncles in weird situations, and I'm close with my parents now, but it was always confusing, and I knew it wasn't going to be confusing for my kids. So it's interesting, man. I think it's really important to prioritize happy, and I think Travis Mash kind of said it too when we interviewed him. He was just talking about how when folks are at my funeral, they're not going to talk about the businessman I was. I want them to talk about the family man, what my kids think of me, some things like that. So I think it's kind of prioritizing and aligning with your intentions. I think that's probably the best thing you need to do. If you're really true to your intentions, you're probably going to be pretty happy. So figure those out, and you'll be good to go there.
That's interesting that Travis said that, and I had the chance. Travis and I were. Travis was the men's team coach for junior Pan Ams, and I was the women's team coach. So I got to spend some time with him down in El Salvador. Awesome guy, and I think what makes our industry potentially tough, right, is that's right. Nobody's going to think about the businessman I was, right? Yep. But our business is relationships.
Sure.
And so when I'm working, I'm not working for money, right? Like I'm up late modifying an athlete's program because I saw the day before that they felt like they strained something, or that I know they haven't been sleeping, or that they're having a fight with their spouse or whatever. And we're doing that because we care about people. Right? We're sticking around the gym longer. You're sticking around your, practice longer because you want to help somebody, not because we're trying to drive more money or anything like that. And so when I think, I left a career as a securities fraud litigator because I didn't care about the money, right? I wanted to have tangible impact, and I wanted to know that people at my funeral would be talking about the impact or something that I was able to help them do to achieve in their lives, right? And so I find that interesting and difficult in our fields, right? In the health and fitness field, of when relationships and helping improve others' lives is your business. I think it's easier to get carried away than it is if your regular job is as a lawyer, accountant, whatever. right? I worked long hours as a lawyer, but when I got tired, if I had worked for 12 hours a day, I was like, I'm going to shut down the computer.
Sure.
Because there wasn't anybody on the other side that I knew would be disappointed or at a detriment for me shutting it down. And here, what I've found harder when I look at that life balance is, I'm not going to tell my athletes here, you know what, like, I don't have time for you. The truth is I probably don't. And if you looked at from an economic aspect and stuff like that. But you know what? They are important to me. I love these kids on, more than just for their athletic qualities. And I don't want to let them down. And I think that the result is that we end up saying yes way more often than we should. And we're not saying no to working with people because we do want to make a difference in their lives. And I know for me, that's how I've gotten overextended. And that is the battle of finding that balance, is that it's not like I'm choosing, money over time, right? It's that I'm choosing how can I let go of all these great opportunities to make a positive impact in somebody's lives.
Do you feel like the one of the other aspects to that is also when you're so personally invested in helping somebody else, it's very emotionally fatiguing. Like it's like to sit and listen to somebody else's problem. I have a lot of patients that are actually psychologists. I have a lot of attorneys and psychologists, people that sell their time for money. They just value their time, so it tends to be who I see. And they talk about this as, they only see a certain amount of people because it frankly affects their home life because they're so emotionally drained. They just don't give a fuck about what anybody else has to say when they leave there. They don't want to listen to anybody's problems, and they're kind of they're turning kind of a jackass. So, do you feel like that's a component of it as well? Because you're so personally invested in this, and it's draining to have that aspect.
It's super draining. So I don't want to tell his story but James Fitzgerald, who, like I said, is a friend, mentor, I got to know him very early on. And, I was talking with James about this one time, and he's like, dude, your adrenals are shot. I was like, dude, I can't get myself into good shape. Like, it takes me 7 days to recover from workouts. And he's like, your adrenals are shot. And we were talking about it, and he's like, he said, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but he's like, you care too much, right? About, like, you let your athletes kind of dictate that emotion. And that was a point that, and I love James, and he was absolutely right. And I knew the minute he said it, I'm like, you're absolutely right. But I'm not sure I could be effective as a coach. Because this is how I'm wired. Is because he has his priorities and his family has priorities, and he much right. And to say, like, this is the time I work, I don't want to interfere with my. But it's smart, and it is that concept of how do you give of yourself and be there without sacrificing yourself too.
Do you
and it can be done. He's a great example of it.
Well, do you think this concept, so you've obviously built a really strong community with Invictus. Do you think this concept of caring too much, though, is also part of the success with building the community at Invictus? Because it seems like it's obviously somewhat contagious. I mean, I remember coming over down there and training with 808 and actually working out with Tino a little bit, and no one knew me from anybody, but when we were doing workouts, it was like, oh, these people really care how I'm doing. Like, they're coaching me up, we're working us through, we're bleeding, we're sweating together, and it's pretty infectious from the moment you walk through the doors there. So as much as that's to your detriment, is it to the success of the concept of Invictus?
Well, I think yes and no, right? So yes, I do think that, and at the same time, if you talk to somebody about, like, somebody that struggles with perfectionism, right? If you're a perfectionist, you think that you're successful in life only because you drive yourself crazy to try to be perfect. And that's probably not true. And that was what James was sharing with me, is like, you could still do a great job and create separation. And like I said, I think there are examples out there of it. I'm not sure I'm wired like that. I look at coaches in other sports, right? And you can look at Phil Jackson or Greg Popovich. I think Greg Popovich is one of the best basketball coaches of all time, right? You can watch Greg Popovich or Phil Jackson in the way they react to things, or Coach K, right? Coach K is very serene most of the time, right? And then you can watch other coaches, examples like Bobby Knight, that are always fired up, right? That are always engaged. And I wonder, is there a method, or is that personal wiring? Because I don't know that I'm wired to sit back and be super subtle and serene. And so, I wish that I could. I think it's a worthy goal to pursue and become a little better at, but I'm not sure that I'm naturally wired that way.
Well, it's interesting to look at this stuff, because I think the personal development side of things, I don't think a lot of people actually do that. Aside from the people that I see that do that are athletes and business owners, typically. Those are and executives. I'll say people that are like really high in that kind of corporate chain. They're all about, how can I get a little bit better? Because it makes a big difference for them and their output. And one of the things that you guys talk about a good bit on your website, and you even have an ebook on this, is mindset. And can you give us like kind of a short summary on what's the Invictus mindset? Like what is that all about, and why do you think it's so important to your athletes?
Sure. I think, so one, it kind of originates with the name Invictus, right? It's not just some cool Latin word. It's an amazing poem by William Ernest Henley. And when you read through the Invictus poem, it was taught to me by my grandfather, who was a World War II South Pacific veteran Marine, and saw some horrible stuff. And they would have to memorize this poem. And you read it, and it's like this warrior's creed. Like, you could see somebody reading it and going into battle all fired up, right? And in fact, it was Henley's manifesto. He was laying in bed for his second or third year consecutive, trying to save his remaining leg. He had already lost one for tuberculosis of the bone. And it's his manifesto saying, outside circumstance will never define me, right? That I will always be the master of my fate and the captain of my soul. Essentially, no matter how bad things get, I will dictate my future. And to me, the power in that, when we look at what we do in training, right? Like I said, I don't, the vast majority of our athletes or clients aren't ever going to go to the CrossFit Games, right? But we're all going to have to deal with setbacks in life. We're all going to have to deal with the loss of a loved one, a terminal illness with somebody that we love. Any of those things require a massive amount of mental fortitude and ability to overcome, right? Injury to ourselves. And how we deal with that, I believe, can be developed by creating, safe obstacles and constantly forcing ourselves past that, right? And so the nature of that Invictus mindset comes from the poem itself, which is how can we develop that unconquerable mindset, that understanding that no matter how bad things get around us, we will, be the masters of our fate. We'll figure out who we are, right? And, life can throw you a lot of things, but it can't change your character, right? That's your character, will determine how you react to the obstacles that are put in your way. And that really is the foundation of what we started to do. Before there was ever a CrossFit Games, where people were competing, I mean, there was the CrossFit Games, but we weren't like training for it initially, is that the idea of opening a gym and calling it Invictus was, how can we help people create that? And at a very basic level, we help people create that by setting goal, making them do things that seem hard, right? Helping them overcome that. Then looking back and said, remember when that seemed hard? And that is the process that we have to use in every aspect of our life, whether it's building a business, having a family, being in a dedicated relationship, no marriage is easy. There are going to be bumps in the road. How you respond to those bumps, right? How you react is the true test of character. And I think the gym environment creates such a cool and safe place to test and build character. That is really why I got into this, not to make people, super fit or have six-pack abs.
It's interesting you bring that up. I have an uncle who's in Washington State. He's a philosophy professor, but he also does these rites of passage camps where he takes kids out into the woods or adults, and they do things, writing their own obituaries. They spend time in nature, but it leads up to this whole process where they spend X amount of hours just sitting in this little circle and developing some kind of a mantra. But I think people do miss these rites of passage, right? You have all these opportunities to get likes and clicks and these different social media responses, but I don't think any of it's really tangible or real. But the gym does provide something where you can earn for it, work for it, and go through it. And I'll be honest with you, not to lighten up the moment here, but I wish I would have read that poem, CJ, and we had a conversation before I went into my vasectomy, because post-vasectomy, bro, I went in the tank. I was out the tank for like 3 months. I gave my superpower away. I got an infection. I did not right my own ship quickly, and for such a small thing to derail me, it was pretty brutal. But the poem might have helped. But I think it's a great lesson for everybody. I think everyone needs something that's going to test them a little bit, and it might be CrossFit, it might be running a marathon, it might be triathlon. But I think the takeaway for me when you described what that was, you need something that's going to challenge you. You need something that's going to get you uncomfortable, and I think a little bit of guidance from a coach or a mentor is also going to be helpful too. So with that said, if folks are looking for a coach, if looking for a mentor, and they want to test out Invictus and reach out to you or Tino or anyone on your staff, what's the best place for folks to find you or to dip their toe in the green waters of the Invictus platform?
Yeah, sure. So email is always great. Just info@invictusathlete.com for people that are looking for coaching. And then in our website, we try to do a lot of education pieces, a lot of different articles, and that's just www.invictusfitness.com or CrossFitInvictus.com. And there should be stuff on there and opportunities to reach out and for us to get in touch and help people.
Very cool. Any final
That's
thoughts,
great,
Andy?
man. Not at all. This is one of my favorite conversations, man. I really appreciate you jumping on with us. I mean, shit, we touched on marijuana. We touched on time management, John Wooden, all kinds of good stuff. This is a great conversation.
Now, my favorite quote that we'll try and do something with is strength is the price of admission, and I think you can take that: strength of the body, strength of the mind, strength of anything. Great takeaways for us, guys. And so, Danny, I think we're going to do it. CJ here kind of helped us prove that if you have a body,
you're an athlete.